Perfect. I riff a little at the beginning, so just bear with me. Hi, everybody. I know how you are. I have watched the algorithms, and you guys come on for the introduction, and then you bolt. So I'm going to make you wait for the introduction. That's how I play it. So I'm Linda Marcus Smith, and I love doing these interviews. Notice I'm not doing the introduction of our guest yet. I'm going to make her and you suffer. So yeah, I do these interviews so that you, the consumers of comedy, whether you're a comedian or you're an actual fan of comedy or you've never gone to comedy, so you can get to know who these comedians are off stage. You can decide if you like them. You can decide if you want to help their career, follow them on social media, share their jokes, whatever. So the reason I do that is because I was standing outside of many comedy clubs. I have many times. I've barked at comedy clubs. I've stood out when people go up to a comedy club, they do the same thing over and over. Okay. I don't mean to be like Jerry Seinfeld right now with observations, but y'all are crazy when you go to comedy club. Would you go to any restaurant and not know what they serve and not know if you liked it? No, you wouldn't. But you do this to us. You make us suffer. You pay good money for a babysitter for a night out, trying to get wet to want to go home to your husband and bang him. I get it. But you got to do your homework. You got to know if you like the person's persona, if you like their delivery style, do you like the kind of jokes they tell, that kind of stuff. You do your homework, and then you have a higher likelihood of leaving the comedy show happy. And that helps your sex life. It's all about sex, okay? It's all about you and your sex. Forget the comedy, sex. And that's how sex sells, comedy. Okay, so now we have a guest here. And her name is Linda Schwartz. And let me put on my readers. I'd call them cheaters, but in my day, a cheater was something different. Okay, so let me read the intro. Linda Schwartz she talks about herself in the third person. I'm kidding. Linda Schwartz has performed around the country at the world famous Comedy Store, as well as the New York Comedy Festival and the Burbank Comedy Festival. Holy Toledo, this is a real comedian. This lady has legs underneath her, as a boxer would say, or a flamingo, but they usually only have one leg under them. Okay, so let's go into the interview and quit with my riffing. Linda, thank you for coming here today.
Oh, I'm dead already. Oh my God, that was so great. Thank you so much for that. I'm already crying. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you, Linda. Oh my God. So you live in LA?
No, I live in San Diego.
Okay. My bad.
All good. I live in I mean, it's close enough. I'm like 2 hours away from LA, but yeah, I live in San Diego, but I'm originally from Georgia. So yeah, I'm from Savannah, Georgia, and that's where I grew up and then came out to California, but we can get into that a little bit later.
You have a great life of things that are unique to you. So that's awesome. I can't wait to hear your whole life story. But before we go into that, I don't know if you remember, but we went through this thing recently called a pandemic. That was sort of, yeah. How'd you do?
Oh man, honestly, I was going through a lot at the time. My son was just a few months old and the pandemic hit, and we were dealing with some health issues with him. So that was quite challenging and quite hard with everything going on. And of course, it was kind of crazy for me because I was going through all those things with my kid. And I don't know if you have children, but, or if you remember, when your lady business came back, but it was like 14 months after my lady business came back. And I also caught COVID. And then I was also hit with like this because of COVID and the fatigue and all the everything else, like the sleep deprivation from having a newborn baby, I was like in this postpartum depression, and it was the pandemic was like emotionally hard for me. Um, I'd been on a long break from comedy, and I honestly was in this really dark place when the pandemic hit. So, but now I'm out of it. Things are good. I'm, you know, life is much better, but I there was a brief moment there where I was like, okay, something has got to give, or I'm gonna need to seek professional help. So
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Well, let's talk about little Linda growing up.
Hmm.
So where were you born? Where were you raised? What was your home life like growing up? I want to hear this.
Oh man, I think I'm sure you've heard it before. Well, I was born and raised in Savannah, Georgia, and to immigrant parents. My parents came from I'm sorry, not Vietnam, Laos, after the Vietnam War. And so, they came with just the clothes on their backs and their three boys, and I was their first American born child. And home life was kind of crazy and volatile and disruptive and dysfunctional. My father was an alcoholic. My mom was very volatile, very emotionally unstable, and just abusive in all the ways, verbally, mentally, spiritually, psychologically, and physically. So it was hard. And then my parents got divorced. And then my mom moved out here to California, and my dad stayed in Georgia. So there was this like bouncing around between them. And then at one point, there was this falling out between my father and myself, and he ended up leaving, and I had to be placed with an older brother. So I was like bounced around between family members and neighbors and things like that. And then eventually I ended up in foster care for a little bit.
At
So
what age did you go into foster care?
I was about 13-ish, like middle school years. And around that, like I would say between, um, like, I want to say 11 and 18, maybe even 16 were like really the hardest years for me, because I was just coming into my adolescence and like, really questioning everything about life and what it meant, and who I was, like, because I was, Asian growing up in Georgia. Like, I remember having an identity crisis very, very early on. Like, I didn't um I didn't see very many people like me. I mean, there were our community of Asian families, of Lao families that we knew, but outside of that, there were no real, representation of people like me on television, in movies, anywhere. And so I was like, who am I? And what the F am I doing here? And so I always felt different, always felt like I didn't belong, I didn't fit in. And I just remember being in middle school, just having um, I'm sorry, my son is knocking on the door.
Take your time, no problem.
Oh, hold on, baby. I'm so sorry, Linda.
No problem at all, Linda. Take your time.
Hey,
I'm
cutie.
retired.
And you can come in, babe, but you have to be quiet, okay? Mommy's on the phone. Okay. You want to say hi to Miss Linda?
Hi, honey. Hi. How
Hi.
old are you and what's your name?
She said, how old are you and what's your name? Huxley, and he'll be 4 tomorrow.
Happy birthday. I'm glad I got to see you before your birthday.
She said,
Happy birthday.
Say, okay, thank you. Okay, great.
Do you know how many birthdays I've had? 72. Can you count that high?
Okay, baby. Thank you. Okay. I need you to, mommy needs to talk to her. Okay. So I just, where'd I leave off? There was like an
I got so
identity.
caught up.
Girl, this is my life.
Yes.
And I'm sure you'll edit this part out, but yeah, like I just had this identity crisis at a very young age because I didn't see people like myself anywhere. And then my parents got divorced. I was bounced around, and then I landed got myself into foster care. And that was that was a very challenging time. That's like
Can I have some candy out in the living room while you're on the phone? I know, I remember those days.
Oh man. And so yeah, it was just a very emotionally trying time in my life. And I just kind of felt, the same things. Like I didn't belong anywhere, I didn't fit in, I just didn't know myself. I felt very displaced everywhere I went. And then when I got out of foster care and came out to California permanently, I was about 14. The state of Georgia found my mom, who was my next of kin, who could have taken care of me, and they facilitated the exchange, or the release, so to speak. And I came out here, and I had this deep Southern accent. And I just remember, like, the first day of high school, first grade of ninth grade, this, Cambodian girl walks up to me and she's like, "Are you Linda from Georgia?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Why do you talk like that?" And I was like what? And I had no idea that she was even talking about my accent, literally until like 5 years later. Because I was like, "Oh wow," like that's why she said that. So that, like, kind of deepened my feelings of being, like a fish out of water, and the outcast, and being different and never fitting in. So yeah, that's kind of my childhood and how I grew up. And then by the time I was 16, I was like, things were really volatile with my mom. So I ended up moving out on my own. And I was like, I can do this on my own.
Yes, absolutely. You've described my life almost point for point for point.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So talk to me about, when did Linda start becoming funny and getting recognized and encouraged into it? And when did you first do it?
Oh man. So I've always like I never knew that comedy was like an outlet, like a creative outlet, because I was never um taught what having a creative outlet was. I had to discover that kind of for myself. And I think I've always kind of been funny, but I I was I was always using the humor to um as a disguise for all the stuff that I was going through as a teenager and as a kid. And I never really recognized it as anything other than like just messing around and joking. But I remember being in my early 20s, and I had this beautiful boyfriend whom I adored. And he was this mixed guy with blue eyes and dreadlocks, and, you know, and he was into comedy, and we bought these DVDs, Def Comedy Jam DVDs, and I had the red one and the blue one, and we would sometimes just get high, like smoke a joint, and then, or a blunt, and we would just lay in our bedroom and watch these DVDs over and over and over. And I never knew back then, like it never occurred to me back then that this was something like that I could do as a career. It was just entertainment and something that I enjoyed watching. And and then I moved down to San Diego. He and I broke up, and I moved down to San Diego for another boy. And um, and things didn't work out with him, but I stayed in San Diego. And when I turned 30, um, like a year or so before I turned 30, like when I was in my late 20s, I was doing improv, and I had already like kind of gotten into acting, and I'd always like had this interest in that, but I'd always also been a writer. Like I used to drown my sorrows in poetry, and that was how I expressed myself in middle school and things like that. So I always considered myself a writer. And and then I did, all the acting stuff. I got into acting. I got into improv. And then one day I was just like, I wonder what stand-up comedy would be like. And I reached out to a friend of mine whom I did improv with, and she's like, "Oh, let me introduce you to my friend." She introduced me to her friend, and I invited him over to pick his brain about stand-up comedy. And it turned out that we had the same birthday. And he was producing a show on our birthday at the comedy club that I was going to go do an open mic at that same night. So serendipitously, we kind of, I was like, I was going to be there. And he was like, "Are you sure that the open mic is going to be there that night? Because I'm pretty sure I'm producing a show that night." And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, "Here, tell you what. I'll give you a 5 minute set." And that's point. I have never done comedy ever. Okay. I've always only thought about it. And this is like the magic of my life. And I'd only thought about it. And he was like, "Listen, I will give you a 5 minute set, and you'll do it at the club downtown, and just help me promote, and that's it." And I was like, "Oh crap." like I oh and before, and I was like, "Oh wow, like what an opportunity." And then he said, "So before I leave, you have to give me an answer today, because when I leave, when I walk out this door, the opportunity is gone." And I was like, "Holy crap." I was like, "Yes, I'll do it." And then I was like, "Oh my God," he left. And then I was like, "Oh, like what am I gonna do? I have no idea." So I didn't even think about like hopping into a class or whatever. And I was like, okay, here, I just started writing and writing and writing things that I thought were funny about my life and things that I was going through at the time. And I wrote a 5 minute set. I reached out to a couple comics that I knew to help me, refine it and give me a few pointers. And then I just started calling anybody and everybody that I knew. And I got probably over 80 people to that show that night. And there was about 300 people in the audience at this club downtown San Diego on a Tuesday night. And it was the most exhilarating thing I had ever done. And like looking back on it, I think I have that set recorded somewhere. And like I think about it now, and I'm like, ugh, I cringe. And like I hope that video never shows its face anywhere. Um and 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 that was the first time I ever did stand-up comedy, and I fell in love with it back then. But at the time, I was actually going through a lot of other stuff. Like I mean, considering all of the personal development that I'd been doing and had done up until that point, I was still in a space of feeling unsafe in my own body and in my environment and everything, because I had like gosh, I think it was probably so October, November, December, January, like 3 months before my performance. I had been I'd been physically assaulted by a very close friend of mine. And
We have
so,
that. We have that in common too. We'll talk after.
yes. And I just, after that, I just kind of felt unsafe in my body. And as comedy clubs, going out night after night, trying to get stage time, like I had the insight and the foresight at that time to know that if I went down that path, considering the mental state that I was in, that I'd have a very, very bleak future ahead of me in terms of like my mental health, physical health, and just my overall well-being. And so I decided, I was like, I'm just going to take a break. I'm going to go live my life and get some experience under my belt, just life experience. And if it calls to me, then I'll come back to it. Like if comedy is my thing, then it will always, then I'll just come back to it. And I honestly thought that it would be like the last thing I ever did creatively because of the state that I was in. And so I took the break, took a long break, shortly after my very first show, maybe the following year. That was 2012. In 2013, I like just came to this mental place in my life where I was like, I'm I feel like I'm at a crossroads. I'm not in a relationship. I don't have any children. I hate my job. I have some money in the bank. I don't have any debt. So, you know what? Nothing is really keeping me here. So I bought a one-way ticket to Bali. I quit my job and I sold everything. And I just kind of took a leap of faith to just go out and have a life. And so I did that. And yeah, it was like the second most exhilarating thing I'd ever done next to stand-up comedy.
Absolutely. Done that too. We are sisters.
So, and then after that, I came back to the States, did a little bit of traveling, made amends with a lot of people,
Me too.
yes, settled up on my past with all the things that I needed to settle up on, like, mentally, spiritually, financially, everything. And I just came to a place where I was like, okay, like I finally feel like I'm at peace within myself again. And I feel like I've done enough living and done enough traveling and done enough seeing of life that I can come back and continue to work on some other things. And so I moved when I got back to San Diego. I ended up moving to the mountains by myself, not knowing anybody or just literally on a whim, because I was like, I visited the place one time and I was like, I could see myself living here. And a few months later, I was living there. And, ended up writing a book, ended up writing a couple books for other people. And I just kind of recreated my life through that journey. And I really began to understand the space of like minimal living, where I gave up everything. I lived in a furnished tiny cabin for a couple of years by myself. The first year, I didn't even turn on the propane heater because I was like, I just want to experience a wood burning fireplace every night in the winter and like know that I can provide that for myself and start the fire on my own and know how to do that. And what I learned from that experience was how I could have very, very little in material things, and that would be enough, and that I am enough for myself and for everyone else. And so and I just went on the spiritual trip too while I was up there. It was just kind of like that whole dynamic of, giving up everything to go find myself and finding myself in the in the mountains, and just having this like spiritual journey in that regard. And then I was like, I'm ready for a relationship. And I created my relationship there. And then I ended up meeting my husband. And when we got together, he was like, yeah, let's go do this class, the spiritual class at USM. I think it's called University of Santa Monica. And it was a 10-month program, and we would go once a month, one weekend a month, and we would just go work out our shit spiritually, you know? And then like I think it was like one of the last weekends, it was close to the end of the program. I got pregnant. And also, I was like, I declared there, I was like, I'm getting back into stand-up comedy. And so because I'd always thought about it. I'd always would think about it. I'd always thought about getting back on it, on the stage. And I would call my friend who got me started, and we would just talk about comedy, and it would just still light me up the way that it did. And I would read, books, I would watch the stand-up comedy specials. And so I was like, okay, I'm ready to get back on stage. And so I did, and I started, and this time I took a class. I was like, okay, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it the right way. And for me, I'm sure there's no right or wrong way for people to get into comedy, but I was like, I would really love to just know how to do it the way that professionals do it, so that I could have a leg up on just writing and all of that. So I took a class, and then I started getting stage time, getting invited to be on shows and all of that. And then shortly after that, I found out I was pregnant, and I was like, oh man, like I'm not going to let this stop me. And of course, like my feet got too big for me to walk out the door. So I was like, yeah, I'm probably just going to stay in and, and, grow this baby. So I ended up taking another long break. And then, the pandemic happened, and all the things that I shared with you at the beginning, at the top, happened. And then I got to this place where I was like, I really just need to rediscover my creative outlet and just do something for myself, where I can have something for myself. Because as you know, being a mom is one of those things where it's like, I hate the word sacrifice, but it's the best word to describe it, where you like really give up everything that means anything to you to take care of your family and your baby and everybody else. And you are in the back of the line. You're the last person to get served dinner. You're the last person to get any kind of anything, and so it became this like self-prophesizing mission for me to just have something for myself and as part of my self-care routine. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so then now we're into 2023. We know how you made it through the pandemic.
Yes.
So where is it what are you doing in comedy these days? What's your life like with comedy and off stage? What are your interests?
Oh man, so comedy is really like my obsession. I absolutely love it. Right now, I just got accepted into the Burbank Comedy Festival, so I'll be performing there next month. And I've applied to a couple of other festivals. I got a couple of rejection letters last week, but that's okay. And I had a show up in Santa Rosa where I lived for about 7 years. That's where my mom moved to when my parents split, and she was there for quite some time. And I ended up being in Santa Rosa for 7 years before I moved down to San Diego. So it was kind of like this homecoming show for me. And while I was there, I had a great show. I had 22 people come out to the show. It was amazing. And by the end of it, I went to go say goodbye to the owner, and he was like, hey, get to 25 minutes and I'll have you back as a headliner. And I was like floored. I was like, wait, what? So that was my first invitation, and it was my invitation for growth. I see it as like an invitation for me to like do more work. So that's kind of where I'm at. And other things that I'm into, I do a lot of Pilates, I do yoga, I walk a lot. I eat probably just as much. I'm always with my son. So, and I'm married. My husband and I are working on a couple of projects for him. He does real estate. He's a real estate broker. So I'm always into something. So I'm doing a lot. I have a lot on my plate.
Wow. My sister's a real estate broker. We have so much in common.
I love it.
She's the broker, but I'm broker. They should call the family members the brokers, whatever. So yeah. So okay. So where do you have something? Do you produce or do you host any shows or where can people see you? What are you up to there in San Diego?
Yeah, so I am not. I've been invited to host at a brewery festival, so I did that last month, and I'll probably get invited to host some more shows. But this month, my show schedule is kind of like we are in July. I have a show coming up on Saturday at Twigs for Comedy Heights. I have a little drop-in set where I'll be doing about 5 minutes. And then I have a show up in Idlewild, which is in the mountains. And I have about
You know why they call it Idlewild?
Why?
They call it Idlewild because when it catches on fire, the place goes from idle to wild like that.
You're so crazy, girl.
Okay, back to you.
I love you. I love you. I love you. So next Saturday I'll be in Idlewild. I'm featuring for the headliner that night. And then
who's the headliner?
Alice Cutler.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I think she lives up there and also in LA. She splits her time between LA and Idlewild. And then at the end of the month, I have another show. Oh, I have a show in Chula Vista on Wednesday, the 26th. And then I have a show in LA at Dow Comedy Studios with
Bobby.
With Bobby. Exactly. With Bobby Oliver. Yeah.
Super. So getting around.
Yeah. And then in August, I'll be in the Burbank Comedy Festival.
What are the dates in August?
August, that Sunday, which is I think the 12th or 13th, and then the Tuesday night, which is the 15th.
Wow, my best of luck to you in the festival. That's awesome.
Thank you. I'm excited for it. So that's my show schedule.
Super. Well, what would you like to say to encourage people to get out to see live comedy? Or how would you like to encourage other comedians at this special time in our comedy world with all of the craziness in the world and the PC and the canceling and all that? Anything you want to talk about, I'm going to give you up to 5 minutes to just talk to whoever's going to listen to this.
Sure. So I'll just share a prime example of why I think people should go out to see live comedy. So in Santa Rosa, I stayed with an Airbnb host, and I invited him to the show, and he was like the whole time we were talking, he was like, "Thank you so much for inviting me to the show because I never get out, and I just don't have any friends, and I literally just work from home. I stay at home and I play video games all day. So thank you for inviting me." Then he goes to the show, and he thoroughly enjoys it. We, come back, we talk after the show, and he is just lit up like a Christmas tree. The joy. It was like he remembered his joy. He remembered why he loved comedy. He was and all of these memories started coming back to him about Comic View and Def Comedy Jams and, Comedy Central, the stuff that he was watching on TV, but he finally got to experience something for the first time live in his hometown that was really, really good. And he was just so lit up, just overflowing with joy, smiling from ear to ear. And it really made me realize why I do and why we do what we do. That remembering of our joy and just that having that experience. And then I would say, if you're a comic and you're wondering why you want to stay, or I would just refer you back to that story because, sometimes you never know what happens after the show. You don't realize how much joy we actually bring people. Like we might have that experience of being in the club at that moment in time all together, and they laugh and then they go home, and then, but in this particular case, for me, it was this aha moment where it was like, wow, he remembered something from his past that brought him so much joy. And now, right now in his life right now, he just was in a space of, I don't have any friends. He was like depressed, sort of, and he was like, well, now I know I can go to the comedy club and remember that joy again. And so that, and it's a hard road, but it's definitely worth it. So stick to it, especially if you know you're funny and if you know you're good. And even if you're not, just work on it. It's a skill that you can learn.
That's right. Thank you so much for your entire interview and all your time. And I look forward to one day coming to San Diego and getting to meet you in person.
Yes, likewise. I don't know where you are, but I'm coming to wherever you are, girl.
I'm in Vegas, and you just hit me up and I'll help you get on shows.
100%. Thank you so much.
Yeah, let me know when you're coming. I'm going to turn off. I'm going to try. I'm not sure how to turn off where people can't see this.